Hello there and welcome to Fairyland Cottage, and thanks very much for joining me here today. I thought we could chat about moving from the city to the countryside. Now, when I lived in the city, I loved the fast pace of living. I could never walk fast enough. I always wanted to be faster than the person beside me. I always wanted more. No matter how much I had, I was never satiated. I found the city incredibly interesting. It was where all the cool people lived. It had all the opportunities. I earned a decent living, and yet I was spending an incredible amount of money. I had credit card debt. I always wanted to wear designer clothes, have a fancy apartment, go to all the fancy restaurants. My whole identity was built on everything external. And yet, when I was really honest with myself, I was stressed, anxious. Nothing ever seemed to be enough, and I was starting to get burnt out. I had a desire to slow down, but I wasn't fully sure how that looked. But the first thing for me was an acknowledgement that I wasn't happy with the life I was living in the city. That I wanted a slower pace of life. I was drawn to living in the countryside because it always felt like it had more space. Previously, when I'd lived in the city, I thought the countryside was boring, it had no opportunities. And yet I was drawn to more greenery, a more simple way of living. So I started to write down the life I wanted to lead. I knew what I didn't want, so I focused on drawing pictures of what I did want. Whether it was a little cottage or growing vegetables. Having this vision of everything being slower, more calm, more peaceful. And then I started to take some action, along with having trust. There was fear of the unknown, but when I wrote things down and took small action, I realised that I got more confident in my vision. And it was a slow process. It didn't happen overnight. It was gradual for me. But I did have to take some action. I looked for a house in the countryside where I lived with some other people in a house share. And I started to get a feel for the country life. I still had a lot of my life in the city and I would travel back and forth. But everything started to slowly slow down. I had a dream of growing vegetables, so I would buy some herbs and sit them on the windowsill. Because when I lived in the city and I wanted a different life, I always thought it would happen sometime in the future. Yet we all know that tomorrow never comes. All we can do is take our action now in this present moment. So it may seem like you're only doing something small, like growing one herb on a windowsill. But all these small actions, they ripple over the years. I was always a bit nervous of moving to the countryside, thinking that I would have no opportunities. I wouldn't be able to get a job, I wouldn't have any money. And yet none of that was true. I was able to find different work. It wasn't necessarily in my previous career, but it didn't seem to matter. I started to live more frugally. External things didn't seem to matter as much. And so although my income was lower, I seemed to have more money in the bank. I also enjoyed a greater sense of community in the countryside. Even though there was far less people, people stopped and chatted to one another. Neighbours were more friendly. And so there was a greater connection with people around. Whereas in the city, I was always too busy to stop and chat. And yet in the countryside, with the sense of community, everybody holds value in others. There seemed to be a greater respect for one another. People would share things, whether it was information or vegetable seeds, or a simple bag of sugar. So the two things that were important to me seemed to be taking some action and trusting the process. And my life then slowly became more enjoyable. There was a little bit of a transition phase, and it took me a while to slow down. I found I had this extra time, and then my creativity increased. I had more space in my mind. In the city, my mind was always clogged with so much. Whereas in the countryside, I have more time to contemplate, to create. Basically, I have more space to breathe. Now, I know we can live a slower paced life in the city, but for me, I find the countryside just more conducive to a slower pace. I found it easier, and I found my health and well-being increase. My body and my mind were far healthier than they were when I lived in the city. My life became simpler and yet far more enjoyable, more peaceful, and more abundant. So I thought we could chat in the comments below. Maybe you have the experience of moving from the city to the countryside. Maybe you're somebody who would like to move from the city to the countryside. And I just thought we could share our experiences together. Because it's great when you hear how somebody else maybe did it. It can give you inspiration if you're looking to do it yourself. So thanks very much for watching this video. As always, chat below or on Instagram. Have a wonderful week. Keep it simple, and I'll see you in the next video.